I think you probably all are familiar with the mission of IMCL, which is to enhance the well-being of all inhabitants, strengthen community, improve social and physical health, and increase civic engagement by sustainably reshaping the built environment of our cities, suburbs, towns, and villages. That's where we start. That's our foundation. To achieve these kinds of cities, we must ensure human sustainability, and that means social and physical health for all, that's health equity, economic sustainability, which is growth at a pace that ensures a living wage for all, and ecological sustainability, an urban form that does not deplete the earth. Now, there is a major problem, a major barrier preventing us from achieving these goals. There are two basic city-making value systems at work, and the main one is the GDP, which sees the city as an economic engine. Our IMCL value system is quality of life, and we see the function of the city as the care and culture of humans and the earth, to paraphrase Lewis Mumford. These two value systems do not always see eye to eye. The goal of GDP is to maximize economic growth through construction. That's the fastest way that the GDP can be increased. And that's why in the last century we had so much horizontal sprawl, because this was a way of increasing economic well-being, but without taking into account all the costs. The costs have now been identified and enumerated. Much of the work of identifying these costs of horizontal sprawl has been achieved by Dick Jackson, from whom you'll hear in a little while, health costs and also ecological costs of horizontal sprawl. But now that the costs of horizontal sprawl are well known, the construction industry has found a much better way of increasing their profits, and that is through vertical sprawl. And that we see around the world now, not only in the Western world, but in Asia, in China, in the Far East, in the Middle East, in Africa, everywhere. We are in a period of extreme capitalism, and this is creating a consumer society fueled by social fragmentation and isolation. The more isolated we feel we are, the less connected to a community, to a network of friends and face-to-face interactions with people, the more we feel that we have to consume in order to satisfy our needs. And that, of course, is very good for the economy. Now, Singapore was a city, a country, which was promoted by the Western world, especially by America, to be a model for the Asia, to show how capitalism could really increase standard of living through high-rise building. Construction and consumption increase carbon dioxide emissions, so much so that by 2010, Singapore was the top carbon dioxide emitter in Asia Pacific, which led Kakabadze, the World Wildlife President, to say Singapore is a society that maybe is one of the best examples of what we should not do. We know what has happened in China with the hundreds of ghost cities that have been created purely in order to increase the GDP. Just investments, just building and building and building, but that has created terrible economic and health problems through the smog and the destruction of the environment. Hong Kong is another city that was really promoted by America and the Western world as a model for how capitalism would improve the world and how superior it was to all other systems. And so they built high-rise, a lot of high-rise. The argument is always that, well, this will make housing more affordable. Well, no. This is now in Hong Kong the least affordable housing in the world. Prices rose 120% since 2008. We know what has happened in New York. The luxury condos inflate land prices and increase inequality. And there is now discussion about the safe deposit boxes in the sky. This is really what is happening, not only now in New York, but again around the world, in cities throughout the US. It's happening in Portland. It's a battle that we are trying to fight in Portland, but it's happening in other cities as well. Just high-rise buildings, which are luxury buildings made to make money, not to house the population who live there, but as global investments. So extreme capitalism increases inequality, causing social and economic instability, says Piketty. It is a form of speculation. We see, for instance, in Mumbai, this vast differences between the upper middle classes who are getting wealthier and wealthier, and luxury apartment buildings are being built right on the edge of the slums, and the poor are getting poorer and poorer, and there's very little work being done to really challenge that whole system. The tallest building in the world is supposed to represent the most powerful and richest country in the world. The Burj Khalifa was symbolic of that. Nevertheless, they have a 20% poverty rate there. So profit is being privatized and loss is socialized. It's a very unbalanced system that we have going on around the world. There's overinvestment in private property, and there's underinvestment in the public realm, in what belongs to all of us, to rich and poor, to the public spaces that we should all have access to. So the money is inside the buildings, and the streets are poverty-stricken. They're designed for cars, but not for people. We've seen this happen in North America for a long time, where streets have become unwalkable and unbikeable, designed really for cars, and we know the consequences of that has led to obesity and related chronic diseases. And this is a pattern which has happened now not only in North America, with which we are most familiar, but also, for instance, in the United Arab Emirates, which has become totally car dependent. They have double the world average of obesity now. When children don't have the opportunity to play outside and walk on the streets and be part of the public realm, they become lonely and depressed and shy. They develop poor social skills because they don't have enough interaction with a variety of people. But they can be medicated, they can be treated for illnesses. Shyness is now an illness, and that's all very good for the GDP. And other symptoms of poor social skills, such as bullying and violence, well, you could say this is good for the increasing the army or increasing the prison industry. It's good for the GDP. So, okay, teenagers in high-rises have a really hard time. Teenagers, the primary developmental task is to learn how to be your own person in society, to learn how to interact with people outside the family, outside the school. High-rises are not designed for enhancing the opportunity for community to develop and for teenagers to become part of society. This is very evident in Tokyo, where they have very high levels of hikikomori. They also have a lot of high-rise buildings, of course. Hikikomori is when it may be school children, teenagers, adolescents, or young adults who at some point they just cannot handle the social environment. They can't go to school anymore. They can't stand the social pressures of being out in public. And they say they're going into their bedroom, they shut the door, they ask their parents to leave their meals outside the door for them, and they don't come out for years. This is a terrible scandal in Japan. There are 700,000 hikikomori in Japan, and they say that there are now 1.55 million on the verge of becoming hikikomori. And it is now being noticed also in Hong Kong, where they have an estimated 18,500 hikikomori in Hong Kong. So this very severe social withdrawal, it's a very, very bad social problem for these countries. It's not only teenagers and young people, but elders and children and mothers raising young children. There have been a lot of studies over the years showing that for these groups especially, high-rise living can be detrimental both to their mental health and to their physical health. And the studies, the reports by Robert Gifford and Gary Evans report all of this research that's been done. Well, European cities used to protect their public realm, but until recently. You know that picture of Canaletto's painting of London? This is what London looks like now. Paris, which has one of the highest densities in the world, don't let anybody fool you into thinking that you have to do high-rise in order to have density, because Paris has 20,000 inhabitants per square kilometer, all within 6 stories. But Paris has now decided that they want to allow high-rise. And the mayor is gung-ho for having these buildings put up. Let's hope not. Let's hope Rome won't be next. Okay, and there is one more scandal which is happening now around the world, and these are what are called instant cities. New Chengdu in China, for 500,000 inhabitants, is being designed by one firm, a whole city, an instant city, and this will be reproduced. This format will be reproduced in different places. Songdo in South Korea, a high-tech, smart, standardized city. This is being designed by Cisco and a developer, Stan Gale, and this will be reproduced again, a standardized city reproduced in different places, totally unrelated to the local culture, the local climate, the local geography, any local needs. The greenest cities come in a box, they say. Now this seems to me a very clear form of greenwashing, using the excuse that they are doing the right thing to build something that is really a way of making a vast amount of money. And they have many, many more cities planned like that. This is one of them. And even worse, you will hear about the Great Vertical City, which is being promoted by a Japanese architect. And this is putting everybody into these high-rise towers with a few platforms in order to protect the green, in order to protect agriculture. But have these people really thought about how human beings live, about how children need to grow up, about the needs of elders, about local cultures? I don't think so. So I am convinced that what we should be saying is that these kinds of developments are cancerous. They're truly killing off the local cultures and the local social fabric of society. And Conrad Lawrence, many years ago, wrote about the comparison between cancerous cells in the body and cancer, what looks to him like cancer in the urban fabric, saying that they have the same kinds of characteristics. This will be discussed more by Mariano Bizzarri later in the program, but it is a very, very fascinating comparison to make. And I won't go into it much, but healthy cells have a regular geometry. Cancerous cells have overly large and irregular geometry. Healthy cells connect to each other, monitor the health of adjacent cells, and form a mutually supportive community. This is all from the language in the studies of cancer. Cancerous cells do not communicate to their context. Healthy cells have slow growth and regenerate themselves over time, and cancerous cells are rapid, out-of-control proliferation. The comparisons can be taken further and further. I won't go into how to treat it or preventing it. Okay, but we need alternatives to the GDP. And there are many efforts around the world which are really trying to lay out different indicators for how to achieve a healthier society, not just a society that makes more money, but that is better for people to live in. And IMCL has its own quality of life indicators, which you will see in the little booklet that you picked up. I won't go into the details. I want to run through the 4 basic principles of true urbanism, and this is really the foundation for these conferences. First of all, we must facilitate access to community social life. We must facilitate access to nature. We must facilitate independent mobility. And in order to achieve this, we must maintain a human-scale, mixed-use built environment. I'll run through what each of these looks like, because that looks very simple, okay? Just 4 principles. But each of them is really very complex. And you can add more and more details to it yourselves. Facilitate access to community social life. You know the concept, the social immune system? Is this familiar to some of you? If you have a good social network, if you know a lot of people, and you see people on a face-to-face basis frequently, and you walk the streets and you stop and you talk with somebody you know, you go shopping and you meet somebody you recognize and you say hello, you have a lot of social support. You don't get sick so often. If you get sick, it's not so serious, and you live to a riper old age. That's called having a strong social immune system. You need a community. So this is one of the goals of making cities livable. How do we make environments that support a strong social community? The most important aspect of that is having a good public realm, having places where people can meet, where they run into each other, where people of different ages meet. And this is in Ascoli Piceno. This is one of the greatest public spaces, I think, in the world. And you can see little toddlers and children and teenagers, and there are students walking up and down, and there are the parents' ages and the grandparents' ages, and there are business people, all in that space together, all intermingling, all having the possibility of getting to know each other and interact with each other. So we need main city squares. Many of our cities in North America don't have squares at all, but we need them to be places where people can meet and gather. But we also need, perhaps even more than that, we need local neighborhood squares, places where the people in the neighborhood just hang out. They go shopping, they go to cafes, they go there to meet and to talk and to sit and read a newspaper. And that's the place that really builds neighborhood social networks. It's especially important for elders and children. Peter Benson said, children must grow up within a web of sustained adult relationships, even from the point at which pre-verbal, before they can speak, they can communicate and they can learn how to communicate. In the arms of their parents, they can learn how to meet and communicate with somebody who at that point is a stranger to them and learn what kind of a person that is. Really, really important. In order for a public space to work, to function well, it must have eyes on the square. Jane Jacobs, we all know Jane Jacobs. So people living above and keeping an eye on the space. It must have attractions, and those mostly have to do with food in all kinds of ways. A farmer's market, cafes and restaurants, places where you buy food. Food is a great attractor of people. It must be hospitable. There must be good seating in the sun or the shade, good lighting, perhaps good sounds, the sound of water or the sound of music. And there must be some beloved feature that children especially are attracted to. The top is in Wangen in Germany, a sculpture that represents the saint of pig herders. And it's beloved, as you can see, by children. A little bit of water, doesn't have to be a great big mammoth thing, but a little bit of water delights children. And there must be a sense of place in that square, in that public realm. A beautiful building that attracts people, that provides a backdrop. An entrance that makes you feel you're really coming into a place. Paving that makes you feel this is for people, not for cars. And in order to get people to be accustomed to coming to the public realm, there must be, probably at the beginning especially, festivals and events that draw people into the streets and squares. This is in Bristol, and it's the Make Sundays special, when all the streets in the city center are closed to traffic, and it's a great big festival and fair, and an enormously popular, as you can see, and a way of getting people accustomed to taking over the streets from the cars. Okay, secondly, contact with nature is really important. There are lots and lots of studies which talk about how important nature is. We need ways through the city, pedestrian routes in nature, away from, say, the train station to the center of the city that goes through a park. There must be incidental nature, nature that just climbs up the walls and across the streets and over the roofs, nature that enhances and softens the city. There must be nature which is available for children's active play and for engagement with nature, and that means it must be easily accessible, very close to where children are living. A great big park is very nice, but if it is so far away that you have to go by car, it's not so valuable for children. We know how important nature is for health and well-being. There are lots and lots of studies that show this, even that a view of trees from your apartment is really important for mental and physical health. But I think it's been known for many centuries. Europe is filled with spa towns, and the characteristic of the spa town is that it is beautiful architecture in a beautiful park-like setting. We need community gardens, not only to provide food in food deserts, but also to bring the community together so that they work together, get to know each other, the community networks get strengthened, and for children to be able to learn what real fresh food is and to begin to care for nature. There are many places in North America which are food deserts, and really around the world also. So there must be good, healthy food available in the neighborhoods through farmers markets and other local stores and so on. And so regional planning is really, really important in order to ensure that nature is available. Balanced transportation planning is not about moving vehicles. It has nothing to do with moving vehicles. It's really about the trips that everybody makes, and that is the trips that little children make, the trips that elders make, the trips that everybody makes, whether by foot or by bicycle or by public transit or by car, and to make those as easily accessible and as comfortable and as pleasant and economical as possible, and especially encouraging pedestrian ways. Children need to be able to walk to school. We have this big program in America trying to get children to walk to school, but this is the kind of environment that really is the ideal way for kids to walk to school, through a public realm that is traffic-free, where there are adults who may become familiars, who may recognize the kids and watch out for them. Anything that enlivens the street is good for making sidewalks safer. So stoops and cafes and parklets are all important. Throughout Europe, the Wohnstrasse or Wohnstrasse is very, very common. You see it in every country, I think. And this is a street in which cars and pedestrians have equal rights to the street, but the car must go at walking speed. You can only park there if you live there or if you're delivering there. So this is not a street that can be used as a throughway or a shortcut. It's really a pedestrian street where cars are also permitted. We need more of those in North America, for sure. Play streets are really good for allowing children to play in a street and closing the street off for a temporary period. It's a sort of transitional phase. But one of the big challenges is to calm arterial roads. This is an example that we awarded from San Diego a few years ago, where you can see at the bottom left what the street looked like before. It was totally uncrossable, very unsafe. And then they traffic calmed it with medians and roundabouts and crosswalks and made it really much more attractive and safe street. But that's the sort of thing that needs to be done for this kind of mammoth streets between mammoth buildings, to begin to rebalance the public realm. We need people to cycle as much as possible. It's a very good, healthy, and social mode of transport. But if we want more people to bicycle, we have to make it safe and good for little children and elders. Sven would have been talking about that. Freiburg is one of the best examples of a bicycle-friendly city. And many of these slides are from Freiburg. The best thing to do is to separate the pedestrians and the bikes and the traffic, keep them all separate. If you can't do that, if you have to have bicycles in the same area as vehicles, then it must be very, very clear where the bicycles are, so to prevent accidents, and bicycles should be brought to the front at intersections to give them priority. But this is really the best kind of buffered bicycle network that can be provided, where the sidewalk is separated by a curb from the bicycle, and the bicycles are separated by a wide strip and a curb from where the vehicles are. That makes a city that is safe for kids. Public transportation is really, really important, and it has to be the kind of public transportation that people who are famous and not so famous, people who are rich and poor, everybody gets to travel together. So it has to be a good system, and it has to be popular for everybody. Who was that fellow on the left? You recognize him? Yes. Okay, and in order to do all of this, we must maintain a human-scale, mixed-use built environment. That will ensure that all of these factors can come together. This is the most wonderful example from Plessis-Robinson, which is just south of Paris. It's a whole new neighborhood, a little new town, which has been built along the model of a traditional French town. We need inner courtyards, and they may be in mixed-use areas where there are little shops or workshops off the main streets, or they may be residential courtyards where children can play and people can sit out. You know, we need to mix use, but we also need to mix incomes. And the traditional fabric of a city for centuries, for 2,000 years, has been this mixed-use fabric where there's a shop, a business at street level. The merchant and his family live above, and then the people who work for that merchant live in the top floors. That's the traditional fabric that has existed for 2,000 years. We can do something similar. On the right is an example from Portland where there are shops and restaurants at street level, and the building above is a combination of some very large condos with 3, maybe 4 bedrooms, but also small apartments and loft apartments even, all in the same building, which really makes a nice combination of a population living together. So shops and restaurants need to be within walking distance, as they are throughout Paris. And we must protect small businesses, and that means we must have small shops, small spaces where little businesses can thrive that don't have such high rents. We have spent a little time in the area that Ettore lives in Rome here, and there's one main street, and we walked down it, Norma and I, and there is a beautiful little grocery store next to a linen store selling luxury linens, next to a pharmacy, tiny pharmacy, all very little, next to one little place that is a garage that's just big enough to fit in a small car, next to the ecological grocery store, next to, and so on and so on. Everything you could possibly need, all on that main street. So we need to protect these small businesses. I've spoken about that. We need permeable upper facades that keep eyes on the street. And we need complete village communities, places where rich and poor, young and old, can all afford to live within close contact with each other. City of short distances, as it's called in Europe. Squares for people within walking distance, nature integrated into the built fabric. That again is from Plessy Robinson. We need to create beauty and human scale, and the top is from Richmond-on-Thames. The bottom is Carmel, Indiana, and you will hear from the mayor of Carmel, Jim Brainerd, a little bit later in the program, how he is building a beautiful center of the city in what was originally suburban sprawl, and he is doing an absolute miracle in that city. We need to maintain the DNA of the city. This is Portland, which had a lot of warehouses and thus brick, and where the main industry was lumber, and the trees are really, really important in Portland, and so having a balcony looking out onto the tree-lined streets is the kind of the epitome of Portland. We need to protect the cultural identity, historic and new buildings, and that is what makes quality of life. It's not just the GDP. This is the message of IMCL, and if you're interested in taking home with you any of the books that we have produced, they are available on the registration desk, and I'd be happy to sign them. Thank you very much.